Picture this. For the third night in a row, a wild wolf is sitting just beyond the edge of your fire. It's not growling or preparing to charge, but it is not leaving either. You have a spear in your hand. For some reason, you decide not to use it. There is one important thing to remember about that wolf. It still has a way back. The forest behind it contains water, prey, shelter, and the rest of its pack. At any moment, the animal can turn around, disappear between the trees, and continue living without you. 14,000 years later, the dog curled up asleep at your feet has almost completely lost that road. Release many modern dogs into the wilderness tonight, and they would not survive for long. Weakness is not the reason. Over thousands of generations, many of the instincts required for an independent life have been softened, redirected, or replaced by something entirely different. Trust in human beings. That leaves us with a much darker question than the usual story of dog domestication. Who took away the wolf's independence? Most people assume ancient humans did it deliberately. We imagine our ancestors finding wolf pups, dragging them back to camp, locking them up, and slowly beating the wildness out of them until the animals became obedient. Science suggests a very different story. A single wolf can be tamed. Raised from birth, it may learn to accept people and even form a deep bond with its caretaker. Beneath that familiarity, however, the animal remains a wolf. Domestication is not something that happens to one creature during one lifetime. It unfolds across hundreds or thousands of generations as certain traits are repeatedly passed forward, while others gradually disappear. Prehistoric humans were also unlikely to have begun such a project intentionally. Life already demanded constant attention to food, shelter, injuries, weather, predators, and rival groups. Nobody had time to sit beside a fire and announce, "I am going to take one of the most dangerous predators on Earth and turn it into something that barks at shadows in my living room." So, cross that explanation out. Nobody designed the first dog. No ancient hunter began with a plan, and no group of people suddenly decided to steal wolves from the forest. The wolf walked over on its own. But why would a powerful wild predator dare to approach a human camp? The answer is not romantic. It came for the leftovers. Life in the wild keeps wolves close to hunger. Most hunts end in failure. Injuries can quickly become fatal, and one missed meal during a brutal winter can become several days without food. Then, humans entered the landscape carrying something unusual. Garbage. Around human camps were bones with scraps of meat still attached, pieces of skin, unused organs, and other discarded remains. Unlike living prey, this food did not run, kick, bite, or fight back. Better still, it appeared in roughly the same place night after night. For a hungry wolf, the smell must have been almost impossible to resist. Coming close enough to eat, however, required overcoming one of the animal's strongest instincts. Biologists use the term flight distance to describe how close a threat can approach before fear forces an animal to run. Biologist Raymond Coppinger placed this concept at the center of his theory about the origin of dogs. Most ancient wolves probably remained far beyond the firelight, waiting until every sound from the human camp had disappeared. Occasionally, though, a wolf would be born with a slightly weaker fear response. Instead of retreating with the rest of the pack, that animal stayed nearby. Perhaps it hid behind the trees while the humans talked. Once the camp grew quiet, hunger pulled it forward step by careful step until it reached the discarded bones. Such a wolf was not necessarily stronger, braver, or more intelligent than the others. Its internal alarm was simply set a little lower. That small difference brought enormous advantages. A reliable source of scraps meant more food during harsh winters, fewer dangerous hunts, and a better chance of raising healthy pups. Some of those pups inherited the same tolerance for human presence. Generation after generation, the pattern repeated. Nature was not following a blueprint for a loyal companion. The process simply favored wolves capable of remaining closest to the fire without running away. At first, loyalty was not being selected. Neither was obedience or affection. The crucial trait was fear, measured by distance. Yet this creates another mystery. Reducing fear might explain why certain wolves tolerated people, but it does not explain why their descendants eventually began looking so different. Dogs developed floppy ears, curled tails, shorter faces, varied coat colors, and a tendency to bark instead of howl. Even the way a dog studies a human face feels different from the guarded stare of a wolf. How could selecting one behavioral trait begin changing an animal's entire body? One clue emerged from an experiment in Siberia. In 1959, geneticist Dmitry Belyaev began breeding silver foxes according to a remarkably simple rule. Only animals showing the least fear and aggression toward humans were allowed to reproduce. Coat color did not matter. Neither did ear shape, tail position, body size, or skull structure. Tameness was the main requirement. Within several generations, some of the foxes began displaying behavior rarely seen among their wild relatives. Instead of avoiding people, they approached them, sought attention, wagged their tails, and made unfamiliar sounds. Physical differences appeared alongside those behavioral changes. White patches emerged in their coats. Faces became rounder, while the position of the ears and tails began shifting in some animals. The project continues to this day under the leadership of biologist Lyudmila Trut, who has followed the fox population for more than 60 years. The experiment remains controversial. In 2020, researchers Catherine Lord and Eleanor Karlsson pointed out that the original foxes came from Canadian fur farms and may already have carried traits shaped by generations of breeding under human control. Even with those limitations, the experiment revealed an important possibility. When animals are repeatedly selected for a lower fear response, behavior may not be the only thing affected. The changes can spread through the developmental systems that shape the rest of the body. The wolf approaching a prehistoric fire knew nothing about genetics. All it wanted was an easier meal. By trading a little fear for a bone, however, its descendants began a transformation that would eventually reach their faces, bodies, hormones, and brains. Consider the way dogs look at us. In 2019, a research team led by scientist Julian Kaminski published a study in the journal PNAS comparing the facial anatomy of dogs and wolves. The researchers found a small but meaningful difference around the eyes. Most dogs possess a well-developed inner eyebrow muscle called the levator anguli oculi medialis, while the muscle is absent or much less developed in wolves. Running faster, biting harder, finding food, or staying warm are not helped by this muscle. Its value lies in communication. When raised, the inner eyebrow makes a dog's eyes appear larger, softer, and more childlike. It creates the familiar expression seen whenever food is on the table, and the dog would like everyone to believe it has not eaten for several months. The study also contained an interesting detail. The only breed in which the researchers did not find this muscle was the Siberian Husky, one of the oldest dog breeds and one of the closest to wolves genetically. Humans respond strongly to that face. We look longer, speak more gently, offer food, and feel a greater urge to protect the animal in front of us. Dogs that communicated more effectively with people gained an advantage. Better communication brought more attention, greater protection, and often more opportunities to reproduce. The bond also began changing humans. In 2015, researchers at Azabu University in Japan reported that sustained eye contact between dogs and their owners could increase oxytocin levels in both. The same hormone plays an important role in attachment between parents and children. What makes the finding especially striking is that the effect did not appear when the experiment was repeated with wolves raised by humans from an early age. What began around a garbage pile eventually became embedded in the biology of both species. A dog's openness toward humans is not merely a behavior learned inside the home. In 2017, a research team at Princeton University identified changes on canine chromosome 6 within the same genetic region that, when deleted in humans, causes Williams syndrome, a condition often associated with unusually high sociability toward strangers. Thousands of years of selection have shaped the way dogs read our faces, respond to our voices, and seek our attention. But that only explains one side of the relationship. Early dogs moved closer to human camps, surrendered much of their fear, and gradually became less capable of living without people. What did we give them in return? Did humans simply sit beside the fire and accept everything the wolf offered? Part of the answer lies inside a grave discovered in 1914 at Oberkassel, outside the city of Bonn, Germany. The burial dates back approximately 14,200 years. Inside were a man, a woman, and 2 dogs. One of the animals was a puppy only about 7 months old. Its teeth preserved evidence of something brutal. In 2018, veterinarian Luc Janssens of Leiden University in the Netherlands re-examined the puppy's teeth. At approximately 19 weeks of age, the animal became seriously ill, most likely with canine distemper. The disease often begins with fever and exhaustion. Discharge can block the eyes and nose, while vomiting and diarrhea leave the body dangerously dehydrated. In severe cases, the infection reaches the nervous system, causing shaking, seizures, loss of coordination, and eventually an inability to stand. According to Janssens, without help, a puppy suffering from such a severe case would have died in less than 3 weeks. But this puppy survived. Evidence in its teeth suggests that the animal remained alive far longer than would normally be expected without sustained care. Its body appears to have reached a critical point and recovered more than once. Think about what such survival would have required. Food was never guaranteed in an Ice Age world. Every healthy member of the group had work to do, and caring for a helpless animal consumed time, warmth, water, and energy that could have been used elsewhere. Someone nevertheless stayed with that puppy. Discharge may have been wiped from its eyes and nose. Water had to be brought to its mouth, warmth provided through the cold, and the animal cleaned when it could no longer control its own body. None of this offered an immediate practical reward. A sick dog cannot help track prey or guard the camp. Unable to stand, it contributes nothing to the hunt and cannot protect anyone from danger. From a strictly survival-based point of view, keeping it alive made no sense. They cared for it anyway, not for a few hours and not merely through one difficult night. The puppy survived long enough for its teeth to preserve signs of repeated illness and recovery. When it finally died, the body was not discarded beyond the camp. The animal was placed carefully beside human beings. Oberkassel was not the only example. At the Koster archaeological site in Illinois, researchers dated dogs buried about 10,000 years ago in individual graves dug specifically for them. Their bones showed no evidence of butchering. By that point, the relationship had moved far beyond leftovers. This was no longer simply a nervous wolf waiting outside the fire for a bone. Somewhere along the way, an animal that once belonged entirely to the forest had become part of a human family. So when modern dog owners worry because their pet refuses a meal, stay awake beside it during an illness, or buy it a blanket for a cold night, they are continuing something remarkably ancient. Humans were caring for dogs with similar emotions 14,000 years ago. The contract between the two species had become real, and both sides contributed to it. Human beings offered food, warmth, safety, and care. Dogs responded by guarding camps, warning of approaching danger, locating wounded prey, and helping hunters follow trails that human senses could not detect. Across frozen landscapes, their strength became just as valuable as their noses and ears. On Zhokhov Island in the Arctic Ocean, Russian archaeologists reported in 2017 that dog remains dating back about 9,000 years showed signs of selective breeding for specific tasks. Two distinct types appeared to have been used, one for pulling sleds and another for hunting. A genetic study published in Science in 2020 further suggested that this ancient lineage continued without interruption into modern Arctic sled dogs. Much later, dog teams carried explorers across polar ice that horses and early machines could not cross safely. On December 14, 1911, Roald Amundsen reached the South Pole with the help of Greenland sled dogs. Robert Falcon Scott's expedition relied on ponies and motorized vehicles, arrived later, and lost every member of the returning party. Yet the greatest thing dogs gave us may not have been speed, strength, or protection. Their most powerful gift was quieter. At this exact moment, somewhere behind a closed door, a dog is waiting. The animal cannot read a clock or understand what this afternoon means. It does not know why its person left where that person went, or exactly when the familiar footsteps will return. All it can do is listen. Every sound in the hallway matters. Each passing vehicle causes a brief moment of attention. Then, when the correct key finally touches the lock, the waiting ends. That response is the distant result of choices made beside ancient fires. Think back to the wolf standing beyond the flames. On that third night, the forest was still available. The animal could move toward the camp or turn around and disappear into the darkness. Neither the wolf nor the human understood what was beginning. Hunger pulled one species closer. Curiosity persuaded the other not to raise the spear. One found an easier source of food, while the other discovered an animal capable of hearing danger, following scent, and surviving alongside people. Somewhere between those two discoveries, an unplanned relationship began to grow. Trust changed the wolf's body and altered the way its descendants communicated. Human lives changed as well. With dogs nearby, people could hunt more effectively, sleep with an early warning system, transport supplies, and enter environments where survival would otherwise have been nearly impossible. Eventually, the relationship became strong enough for prehistoric people to spend precious food and energy caring for a dying puppy that could offer them nothing in return. Ancient humans did not create dogs by capturing wolves and forcing them into submission. No single person invented the dog, and no generation witnessed the entire transformation. Dogs emerged slowly in the narrow space between hunger and fear. A few wolves tolerated the fire. Their descendants moved closer, learned to read human behavior, and found safety beside our camps. In return, people began feeding, protecting, and eventually loving the animals that chose to stay. The wolf made the first move. Human care gave its descendants a reason not to leave. Neither side could have imagined where that decision would lead. Nobody beside that ancient fire knew dogs would one day cross continents with us, sleep inside our homes, protect children, guide people who could not see, search for the missing, and wait faithfully behind doors for our return. Everything that happened in the beginning was simple. A wild animal moved a little closer. A human being lowered the spear. That was enough. Dogs were not created inside cages. They were created at the edge of the fire where fear slowly became trust. And they have been walking beside us ever since.